Well, the series is over. Daredevil Born Again's come to an end, and honestly, I have mixed feelings about the whole thing. The action set pieces were brilliant and absolutely brutal, and certain characters and plot points I did think worked really well, but then there were some certain characters which I felt were absolutely useless and brought into the show purely for the sake of it and to replace characters that didn't need replacing, or just to deliver exposition to characters when they needed it, really. And they did have an episode in the middle of the series which was quite literally pointless, and it just so happens that's the first episode I'm reviewing today in this video. Episode 5 was absolutely pointless. Literally, you could take this episode out of the show entirely without even putting any extra dialogue into any other episodes, and it would not have made a single bit of difference. The episode is essentially a bottle episode inside of a bank, with an Irish gang robbing it on St. Patrick's Day. Matt goes to the New York Mutual Bank for a meeting about a loan for his firm, but the bank manager's had an emergency, so instead it was with the assistant manager, Yusuf Khan, aka Miss Marvel's dad. It was announced before the show aired that he would be appearing, and to be honest, I hadn't the foggiest idea how he would fit into the show or what role he would play. Turns out he's pretty much only there to give Matt someone to talk to throughout the bottle episode, and also inform him of Miss Marvel's existence, which, unless she appears in the second season of the show, I'm not sure they'll ever end up paying that off. How he brings it up feels especially out of place, though. I can't imagine an assistant bank manager sitting down for a meeting and within the first minute taking out his phone, checking a text, and then talking to a customer about his daughter at the first meeting before any business has taken place. Seems rather unprofessional, if you ask me. The meeting progresses, and Matt makes a nice little speech trying to convince Mr. Khan to get the loan, but he's unsuccessful and he ultimately leaves the bank. He calls Kirsten to tell her they've had another rejection, but then he hears people screaming at the bank that he's just left as a gang of armed robbers have just entered. He tells Kirsten to call 911 and then hangs up, giving her absolutely zero information about whether she's calling the police, the fire, the ambulance, what for, or where to. Just hangs up and runs off, going to the bank to join up with the rest of the hostages. I have no idea how he thought she was going to know any information about what to call them for or how it would help in the slightest. But anyway, she ends up calling them, and the police do end up turning up eventually. Once Matt's inside the bank, he listens to the heartbeats of the hostages and figures out that there is one woman who's a lot calmer than the rest, confirming to him that she's working with the robbers. She's the one that says to the robbers that the manager might not be there, causing them to question Khan about his whereabouts. Obviously, he isn't there, so they ask Khan if he can open the vault, and he stupidly lies and says yes. I mean, what's the point? What are they going to do if they know there's no chance they're going to get in the vault for another 2 hours at least? They're probably going to piss off. But no, we need Matt to save the day, so he decides to tell them that he can open it, and Matt realizes immediately that he can't. He advises Khan against going back and telling them the truth because they probably won't believe him, and asks him to stall as long as possible, risking his life in the process. Detective Kim then shows up and starts to negotiate with one of the robbers, who decides to use the alias Jesse James after an American outlaw from the 1800s. The robber gets the upper hand of the negotiation and has requested 3 APVs outside the bank in 30 minutes' time. In exchange, they agree to release 2 hostages and pick Matt and a woman who's in there with a new husband. Matt asks them to let the husband go instead of him, prompting the robbers to ask more questions about Matt, where they find out he's Irish and an orphan. At this point, they allow him to stay purely because of how crazy his backstory is, comparing him to a Charles Dickens character, which, to be honest, I fully understand. The husband and wife get released, and one of the robbers takes Mr. Khan down to the vault to open it. Matt tells the robbers that he needs to go to the bathroom, and while on the staircase, he takes down the robber that's escorting him there as quietly as possible as not to arouse suspicion, and even catches the shotgun mid fall while strangling the robber with his legs. In this scene, the soundtrack disappears as well, and you get to hear the sound of the fight and really get to notice how quiet Matt's trying to be, which was a really nice touch and did add a lot of tension to the scene, which I appreciated. After beating this robber, he goes down to the vault to help Mr. Khan and take out the robber keeping him hostage as well. Matt manages to break into the vault to Mr. Khan's surprise and manages to find the orange diamond that the robbers were after. Fun fact, the colours of the 5 robbers' masks and the orange diamond make up the 6 colours of the Infinity Stones. As Matt is searching for the stone, the head robber is again on the phone to Detective Kim, where he tells her to tell him a joke and make him laugh or he'll kill a hostage. She does make him laugh in the end and eventually gives her another 10 minutes. At this point, Matt and Mr. Khan go back up to where the hostages are being held and confront the robbers while at gunpoint. Matt informs them that the police are about to make a move and haven't listened to the robbers' demands, and that they're running out of time. Matt throws them the diamond as a distraction as the police make their entrance. A gunfight follows with the hostages in the crossfire, and Matt uses the smoke and the panic as a cover to take out one of the robbers himself, before hearing that the woman who was pretending to be a hostage now has the diamond and needs to give it to Luca, the head of one of the 5 families. Matt ends up chasing after the head robber instead of her, brutally beating him, snapping his leg and cutting his face with glass. It cuts to the woman who we suppose has the diamond, who stops to take it out in the middle of the street, which is a stupid move. but realizes that it's actually just one of the toffees from Mr. Khan's desk. The diamond was actually on the head robber the whole time, something which Matt had obviously picked up on. He obviously takes the diamond back, and then I'm assuming the day after, goes for another meeting with Mr. Khan just to catch up, and leaves it in his toffee jar for him to find just after Matt has gone. And that's episode 5. There's absolutely nothing that carries over to the rest of the season, no major character developments, and it's just the most pointless episode of filler I've seen in a long time. A bottle episode or filler episode doesn't have to be this pointless. I know it's an overused example, but for this type of thing. But in Doctor Who season 4, there's an episode called Midnight. Pretty much the entire episode takes place in one room. You never see the actual villain, but it's one of the most scary and memorable episodes of Doctor Who ever. There's great character work with David Tennant actually being challenged by a group of humans for the first time in a long time, and them not trusting him and wanting to kill him at one point as well, which is something the Doctor doesn't typically have to deal with people he's trying to help. But on top of this, they actually set up the Doctor's end in the end of time with the 4 knocks in this episode long before it. That's how you deal with a bottle episode effectively. Anyway, back to Daredevil, and let's move on to episode 6. Episode 6 begins with a lot of setup for the episode. We see the BB reports talking to people about graffiti artists and the new murals popping up in the city, and we see workers trying to clean up the murals left by Muse. We cut to a worker at the Red Hook port, and he finds a dead body there with blood running from his eyes like Muse's mask. We then cut to Matt in his room, praying while holding a picture of Foggy and remembering him. And it also shows flashbacks of all the events from this season that are driving Matt to go back to becoming Daredevil again. We see Foggy getting shot and the fight with Bullseye, the conversation with Fisk, Hector Ayala in prison, Matt beating the cops up from the end of episode 2, the bank robbery from the last episode, and then Foggy dying as Matt says amen. Heather comes in and asks Matt about his praying. He explained that he always ends up going back to it at some point or another. Heather's surprised that Matt seemed okay after being involved with the bank robbery, but Matt just insists that he knew he was going to be okay because of faith. Heather reveals that she wants to write a new book on vigilantes and why we revere the mask. And they have a bit of a back and forth about this, where Matt is obviously trying to subtly dissuade her. And then Heather asks if he could set her up with an interview with either the Punisher or Daredevil, as he's represented the Punisher and has worked with Daredevil in the past too, or at least she thinks that anyway. Matt is obviously hesitant, but they agree to talk about it later before she heads off to a meeting. This scene between Heather and Matt is intercut with a scene of Luca going to visit Fisk at his office to confront him about the 1.8 million that Vanessa's ordered him to pay for killing earlier in the season. Luca basically tells Fisk to shove the 1.8 up his arse, so Fisk walks right up to his face and ups it to 2.8 million, with the balance going to himself, while putting one of his pins in Luca's jacket, giving him until the end of the week to pay and showing him the door. Fisk is obviously slipping back into his kingpin ways in this scene, and that part of the scene was intercut with the part where Heather's giving her hypothesis on why people wear masks, whether it allows people to be their true selves or strip away their identity so they can act like an animal. I personally see an argument for both, with both Daredevil and Kingpin, and I feel like Daredevil and Kingpin are both of these characters' more animalistic sides, but at the same time seem to also be the true nature, as they can't ever seem to escape that side of themselves. After the opening credits, a sanitation worker goes to see Fisk to tell him that they're having trouble removing the murals around the city due to them being made from blood, so Fisk orders Gallo to his office immediately. Matt and Kirsten are talking about a case at their office before Hector Ayala's niece Angela shows up to talk to Matt. She tells Matt that Hector was looking into something with people going missing on the streets and is asking for Matt's help to pretty much do anything, as she can't go to the police as they're the ones that killed her uncle. Matt initially refuses, saying that there's nothing he can do, but inside he is debating whether to go back out as Daredevil and help, something he obviously can't tell Angela about. She has a bit of a tantrum, and as she's leaving, she tells Matt something Hector had told her. Don't rely on anyone to do what you can do yourself. I thought at the time that this was going to be the start of her picking up her uncle's mantle, but at the end of season 1, it hasn't really been brought up again. It may come back around in season 2, but I'm quite glad that at least in this season they didn't bring it up and left the character there, really, and didn't immediately try to fill his shoes after his death. Fisk is now having a meeting with Gallo and other officials in his office, where Gallo explains that they've identified at least 5 DNA profiles per mural, with at least 60 victims identified so far. They are dealing with a serial killer. Fisk starts to drown out all the noise in the room, seemingly getting overwhelmed with the situation at first, being on the other side of the law. But he starts to laugh, making everyone else feel uncomfortable in the room as he realizes the role isn't much different to his role of Kingpin. And especially in this instance, he can act in similar ways to get results. He says that the public should not be informed as to not alert the killer, something that Gallo disagrees with. But Fisk makes the fair point, to be fair, that if the sanitation team can find out there's a serial killer who's killed 60 plus people before the NYPD can, then maybe it's time for a change in protocol. Not necessarily mayoral behaviour, but it definitely puts Gallo in his place, and I think it's a fair point myself. We cut to late at night, and two drunk girls find Muse painting a mural. He ends up attacking them, later leaving them for dead, with blood streaming from their eyes under the mural, seemingly as a message to the police. Back with Fisk, and he tells Vanessa that Luca had come to see him at his office and what happened there, and starts to explain to her that politics, although different, is not entirely separate from the criminal world they're used to and how it operates, and there's a lot of crossover with how you deal with things. Finding what someone wants and either withholding it or providing it. They go to an event where Fisk is trying to get investment from the elite of the city for a project to revitalise the Red Hook port. It doesn't seem as though the event goes well, with many of the billionaires saying that it seems as though it's just a self-serving project and it won't work, and even Swordsman returning from the Hawkeye show and warning Fisk about about how much power the room actually has and what some of the consequences could be. Kingpin's obviously a bit out of his depth here, not being able to use any kind of force to get what he wants in this instance, but instead being knocked back by people who think they're untouchable, another factor of Fisk's decline back into Kingpin. Cherry goes to visit Matt at his office at night to tell him about the news of the serial killer Muse, who he'd heard about from a source at the NYPD. He tells Matt that he's a graffiti artist and that he's painting with the victims' bloods. And Cherry tells Matt to stay out of this and just to let the police do their jobs. I know Cherry said that he wanted Matt to hear this from him, but if he was that worried about him suiting up again, why wouldn't he just not tell him in the first place? Surely you'd wait and see what the police do and whether they catch him before it becomes public knowledge, and then it would never be an issue, and Matt would never have to know about it and go back out there in the first place. But nope, it's just another example of the character Cherry being used to purely deliver exposition and then leave the scene. We cut back to Fisk being pulled out of the event by his staff to show him that there's another mural that Muse has painted, but with the two dead girls from earlier in the episode, with blood streaming down the faces underneath it. They conclude that he's trying to mock the police, so Fisk uses this and the panic in the city to set up the anti-vigilante task force, using crooked cops that he's handpicked himself. He knows they're in a gang, but he decides to describe them as motivated individuals when he's talking to Gallo about them. He sets up a meeting to tell them all of the new roles, and we find out more about one of the cops called Cole North and his history, and the over-aggressive methods that led to his lose his detective role. It turns out the cop is the one that killed Hector Ayala, as we find out in the finale, and Fisk tells them that they're now part of the anti-vigilante task force and that they're now tasked with going to find and kill Muse. Now we find out that Angela, Hector's niece, is now in the tunnels under the city following the leads that Hector left behind. This is where Muse's base is, and she gets attacked by Muse, who starts to drain the blood out of her, as he's done with all his previous victims. Matt gets a call from Angela's mother, who's worried that she's missing, and this is what finally tips Matt over the edge. He starts to call 911, but as we hear the Daredevil score start to rise in the background, he says, fuck it, and goes round to go and get his suit on and help Angela. We then finish the episode as we started it, with two scenes of Daredevil and Kingpin intercut with each other, but this time, instead of them trying to fight, returning to their darker halves, this time they've both embraced that part of themselves again. On the Kingpin side of things, he's gone down to his basement where he's keeping Vanessa's ex Adam hostage. He's carrying an axe, which he gives to Adam to make it a fairer fight after he opens the door to Adam's cell. He doesn't want to kill Adam, but he does want to take out his anger and show him that even when he has a weapon, he's no match for the Kingpin. Kingpin easily destroys him, but he doesn't quite kill him, instead throwing him back in the cell. On the Daredevil side of things, he finds Muse's hideout and starts fighting with him to save Angela. Muse holds his own for a while, but Matt is obviously the better and more experienced fighter. There's some fairly impressive fight choreography here, and towards the end, he starts to strangle Muse with his billy clubs. He nearly kills Muse, but before he can, he goes to check that Angela's okay, and while he's checking on her, Muse manages to slip away. When the episode aired, there was a lot of talk about whether they might lean into Muse's powers from the comics that include him not being able to be sensed by Daredevil, as Matt would typically have noticed him trying to get away, but this is never really referenced again throughout the show. Matt saves Angela, stopping the blood from being drained, and she sees that Daredevil's there to save her before the credits roll. I personally thought this episode was a lot better than the last one. The theme of the show was in full view in this episode, with the parallels between Matt and Fisk. This episode acts as a tipping point for both of these characters, going back into their darker personas, and about time too, to be honest, as we've only got 3 episodes left after this to go and a lot to wrap up. Muse is back out there and on the loose, so let's see how episode 7 deals with this. Episode 7 begins with Fisk finding out that Angela survived the attack from Muse and managed to tell the cops where Muse's hideout was. However, he's less happy to find out that she escaped through Daredevil saving her. He kicks Buck and Daniel out of his office when he finds this out, saying to himself, he's back, before the intro kicks in. I imagine this plays a further role in Fisk receding back into his Kingpin persona, knowing that Matt has also given in and gone back to his Daredevil one. After the intro credits, we see Matt in the shower contemplating the previous night's events before Heather joins him. Afterwards, she's questioning him about where he was the previous night and where he got his bruises from. He initially lies, saying it was for work, but she points out that his briefcase was left at home, so instead he tells her that he went out for a walk and bumped into some things on the way, which is also a lie, but she believes that one slightly more. She's worried that he's self-harming in whatever capacity, which to be fair he kind of is, and tries to be a therapist to him, but he thankfully jokes his way out of that one, so we didn't have to watch that. Matt says to her that this whole new life has got kind of a fake feeling to him. Um, and to be honest, it has the same feeling for me. It doesn't feel like the Daredevil we used to, because it doesn't have the same supporting cast, and the replacement characters are just nowhere near as built up or engaging. At least when Karen showed up in the first couple of episodes, and in the finale, the show actually felt a bit more like the original Daredevil. Matt goes to work and finds Cherry there, unhappy with him for going out as Daredevil, which to be honest was his fault in the first place, and Cherry refuses to start digging for more information for Matt to help him find Muse. As Cherry's on the way out, he's confronted by Kirsten, who's worried about Matt as he has a heavy workload and doesn't seem to be doing any of it, but instead spending his time out of the office and talking to Cherry in private meetings. Cherry doesn't give anything away, which Kirsten's unhappy about, as she thinks they should be a team and shouldn't hide things from each other. But to be honest, in my opinion, if Cherry had broken Matt's trust by telling Kirsten, then surely Kirsten wouldn't trust him and be worried that he'd do the same to her. So it's kind of backwards logic to me. Seeing as Cherry isn't being helpful, Matt decides to visit Angela at the hospital to try and see if she's got any extra information that can help him find Muse. She ends up telling Matt about the sketches Muse was doing of faces. Fisk finds out from Detective Kim that there's a good chance that they know who Muse is, a young man called Bastian. It turns out that this is actually the new client that Heather's taken on at the book signing earlier in the series, and she's just sat down for a meeting with him. Bastian ends up revealing himself as Muse to Heather after mentioning that he's been training Taekwondo, which explains how he could somewhat hold his own against Matt. He starts to get a nosebleed, but instead of cleaning it up, he uses it to draw Muse's face. It's at this point that Heather realizes who he is, and he explains that it's down to her that he's become his true self. Or you could say he's been born again as Muse, going with the theme of the show for this season. Heather starts to cry at first, and he tries to comfort her, but then after a short while, he does start to attack her. While this is going on, Matt is in Muse's hideout looking for clues when he finds the paintings of Heather's face. Somehow, just by feeling the paintings, he knows that it's Heather, and that's how he knows to go and rescue her. I know his senses are heightened, but surely this is taking the piss. I mean, even if he could tell who it was just off the touch, like he can with real faces, something he's done with Heather and Karen in the past, it would mean that the painting would have to be pretty much one for one, and also ideally 3D. There's no chance you're getting that amount of detail on a 2D painting for him to be able to tell who it is. It's just not happening. But anyway, he figures out that it's Heather at the same time that Fisk also finds out from the people doing facial recognition on the paintings. So both Daredevil and the anti-vigilante task force are on the way to help her. Leading up to them arriving, Muse had got dressed in his costume and started refusing to answer to the name Bastian. He's tied Heather up and slices her arm up bad. He hears the police turn up outside, panics, puts Heather on the floor in a struggle, and starts to strangle her, which is when Daredevil comes through the window. They have a pretty decent fight. Matt makes good use of his grapple, getting Muse with it a few times to stop him going after Heather again. Matt is winning the fight, although it is fairly even. But then Heather, as Muse is distracted, shoots him multiple times in the chest, killing him before passing out from loss of blood. Matt manages to stabilize her and disappears just before the task force arrive. And Fisk shows up later on and tells the task force that they're going to take the credit for this and that Daredevil was never there. He later says this in a news conference to try and boost the image of the task force in the public eye and not give the vigilante any of the credit, further justifying his need for the task force in the city. In order to keep the fact that Daredevil was involved under wraps, he gets Daniel to threaten BB as well, to ensure that she no longer continues to post about Daredevil helping in the situation as she has been so far. This works, but BB is less than happy with the situation. Matt goes to visit Heather at the hospital, who's obviously somewhat shaken by the events. She remembers Daredevil being there and thinks that he might have even said her name as he was helping her, something that he did twice while stabilising her. I thought when watching this that she may end up finding out who Matt's darker half is, but by the end of the season, she still hasn't put two and two together yet. Now, the only plotline I haven't mentioned yet in this episode is the plotline between Luca and Vanessa. Earlier in the episode, Luca and Vanessa have a meeting where Luca's unhappy about Fisk ordering the 1.8 million payment, and then upping it by another 1 million tax. Vanessa informs him that it was actually her who put the initial 1.8 million payment on there because he'd broken the rules that she'd set. But Luca no longer thinks that the rules are worth following now she's no longer in charge, and wants to help remove Fisk from the situation as they were more profitable while she was in charge. Towards the end of the episode, it appears Vanessa may have taken him up on this, giving Luca the address of where Fisk is currently eating dinner alone. But it turns out she did actually stay loyal to Fisk, as Buck actually shoots Luca just before he can get his shot off on Fisk. She seems to be slowly coming back round to her husband, especially with Adam's absence, and is starting to see the benefit that his plan can have for them as well. Overall, I'm not hugely happy with how they dealt with Vanessa in this series, but this decision, I think, was something that was consistent with her character, so fair play for that one at least. By the end of the series, she does end up falling in love with Fisk again and becoming the character she should have been throughout the entire series, but instead they had to make her and Fisk do a step backwards just to take the same step forward to explain why she wasn't there in the previous shows that he appeared in. I did like parts of this episode. It again dealt with the theme of Fisk, Matt, and now also Muse being reborn back into their darker personas. But I do think Muse was a bit of a wasted villain. There was great potential with him, and they never really touched on the powers that he had in the comics, and he's killed off after only really having 2 episodes to do anything. I get they had other things they wanted to do with the last couple of episodes, but either work him into it, don't have him in the show, or at least don't kill him off so we can use him again in future. That's 2 cool characters now that they've killed off, where they've barely done anything really in the show. Obviously, there's a good reason for White Tiger, but this one really could have been avoided, and in my opinion, he had the potential to do so much more. Episode 8 begins with Benjamin Poindexter, aka Bullseye, in prison. Some guards come to his cell to move him, and there's a line which really grates me. One guard says to the other that usually we collect the stuff, but they don't let this fucker keep anything, so it looks like we're travelling light today. Now, on the surface, that might seem fine, but it's the usually we collect their stuff that really gets me. Like, he does the same job that you do. He knows this. Why do you need to tell him? It's only there to make the audience understand, but it just felt super clunky to me. Anyway, they're moving him to Gem Pop at the request of Fisk, seemingly so that he'll get killed there as his former FBI, and that typically isn't looked favourably upon in prison. He has his hands tied up as well, which means he can't defend himself either, so he is pretty much a sitting duck. Poindexter says that he isn't supposed to be there to the prison guards, meaning prison in general, which we find out in the next episode is due to the deal he made to have Foggy killed. Fisk takes Vanessa to Red Hook Port, down to his basement where he's keeping Adam. On the way there, he's explaining to Vanessa that he's not throwing away their old empire and business at the port, but rather transforming them. And they also mentioned the situation with Luca from the previous episode, confirming that Vanessa had played Luca and given him up to Fisk. She's started to earn his trust again, something which will be complete after what happens next. Fisk shows Vanessa to Adam and explains that essentially he can't live without her and can't stand the sight or thought of him, but he promised not to kill him. Instead, he wants her to kill him. She picks up the gun from the table, and while Adam's pleading for her not to, she shoots and kills him, cementing her place back at Fisk's side. Meanwhile, Matt and Heather are having a debate about vigilantes after her near-death experience with Muse. She's struggling with the fact that she killed him and starts to berate people who wear masks, labeling Muse and Daredevil as the same and calling them underdeveloped and trying to make their tendencies seem sophisticated. She also says that Daredevil didn't save her, but she saved herself, which is utter bollocks. She was literally tied up, getting strangled, and about to die before Daredevil burst through the window, and she only shot and killed Muse while he was distracted in the middle of fighting Daredevil. Jesus Christ. There's a knock at the door, and Buck is there to check on Heather and invite her to a gala being hosted by Fisk. Matt is confused as to how Buck or Fisk knows that Heather would be staying there, as am I to be honest, because correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think they ever actually explain how they knew that. I don't think at this point that Heather had told Fisk or Fisk had ever seen them together, but if I'm wrong, let me know in the comments. Anyway, Matt does put it together that Fisk is a client of hers, which he's understandably unhappy about and tries to warn her off him as much as he can. She's defensive about this and tries to defend her position, saying that Fisk is already in their lives as mayor, so what difference does it make? And that she believes in his stance against vigilantes. He reluctantly agrees to go to the gala with her, something which will end up proving a costly mistake in the end. Matt goes to his office and finds out from Kirsten that Poindexter was moved to Gem Pop at Fisk's request, and that Poindexter has actually requested to talk to Matt. Before going apeshit at a client, he knows he's lying and storms out. Kirsten catches up with Matt after this, and he explains to her that he feels as though what they do means nothing anymore. People escape, people don't get put away who should, and people still get murdered like Hector, or people do get put away who don't really deserve it. Although the example he used from the guy from episode 4 is a really bad example considering he's a repeat offender. But this is just another sign of him giving up on trying to be Matt and going back to his Daredevil persona. He's losing faith in the system again and thinks the only way to solve it is outside the law as Daredevil. Matt finds himself at Josie's having a drink, and Cherry finds him there after Kirsten has called him worried. Matt tells Cherry that he's back to being Daredevil, which Cherry points out is very bad timing as Fisk is on an anti-vigilante rampage. He can't manage to convince Cherry that Foggy's murder and Poindexter is linked with Fisk, but when Josie brings out the bottle of O'Melvenies and says it was Foggy's last drink, Matt realises that he must have been celebrating an early win and must have known he was already going to win the case, so the Fisk had him silenced. He doesn't know exactly why, but upon realising that out, Matt goes and has a heated conversation with Poindexter. Matt and Poindexter have a back and forth, with Matt trying to get confirmation that Ben was hired by the Fisks, and Ben is trying to get out of prison or at least get out of Gem Pop in return. Matt gets pissed off and smashes Ben's head into the table repeatedly and telling him to fuck himself, but Ben thanks him. We later find out that he thanked him because he actually dislodged a tooth, something which Ben uses to kill the doctors in the prison and subsequently escape by dressing as guard and getting out of the prison on the bus at the end of their shift. Fisk's gala has started, and Daniel and BB make up, with Daniel explaining that it's just the gig, which is the reason that he was so mean to her, but that action did cause him to get a promotion, which is probably part of the reason BB decided to stay close to him so she can get more information out of him down the line. Heather's there on her own with no idea whether Matt's coming or not. He does eventually turn up, but only after Heather's had a catch up with Vanessa, where she's told her that they no longer need her therapy assistance, and that the sins of the past are dead and buried, meaning Adam specifically. Matt turns up and immediately starts to go towards Fisk until Heather interrupts him. Heather's complaining about how Matt's constantly checked out with her both physically and emotionally, and then he just stops completely listening to her to listen to a conversation between Fisk and the swordsman instead, which I thought was absolutely hilarious, literally proving a point immediately. Turns out Fisk is blackmailing the swordsman and pretty much every other billionaire at the gala, and repeated Jack's line back to him that it's not a threat but a warning from the last gala where Fisk was trying to get funding from the port the last time. Commissioner Gallo interrupts some members of the task force, being overly aggressive with a member of the press who was taking photos, even burning his hand in a deep fat fryer. And shortly after, BB confronts Gallo and asks him for information against Fisk, revealing that she knows that he was involved with the murder of his uncle, and Gallo agrees to give her some information about the cops in the task force that he's found. Matt continues to try and warn Heather off Fisk and tries to confront him alongside Heather, but luckily Vanessa spots this and intervenes, saying it's time for their first dance of the evening. Matt and Heather also join the dance floor a few minutes later, and Matt tells her that Fisk is a monster and is not running from him anymore. While dancing, Fisk is quietly talking to himself, directed at Matt, knowing that he can hear him. Fair play to the writers, this was clever. Fisk knew that he had exceptional hearing, so to use this to have a private conversation in public is quite smart. Matt is warning Heather throughout this that if anything happens, she needs to get out of there and either call Cherry or Kirsten, thinking that something was going to probably happen between him and Fisk. But Poindexter's arrived at the gala, taken out a guard on the balcony and taken a shot at Fisk. Matt realises this and jumps in front of Fisk, taking the shot for him at the last second. Probably the single most stupid thing he could have done. The only thing I can think of is that maybe he thought that it would stop Fisk from being able to reveal his identity, because if it did, then it would be hunting a man who saved his life, while showing to the world that not all vigilantes are bad people. Obviously, that doesn't work though, and it's a risky play either way. So I struggle to understand why he did it, to be honest. But just before Poindexter had taken the shot, Matt had swapped partners with Fisk in order to talk to Vanessa, having recently figured out that it was her that ordered the hit on Foggy, but he doesn't know why. He threatens Vanessa that she'll pay for this, but then he heard Bullseye's gun cocking, and that's when he decides to save Fisk. And that's episode 8 done. Overall, I feel it was a pretty decent episode. Not amazing, but it was good to see Matt finally back Daredeviling properly again. I feel like it's taken too long for him to get back into that side of himself, considering it's only a 9 episode season, but we finally made it with 1 episode to go, just in time for the finale. Not got too many issues with this episode, other than a couple of bits of dialogue that I've already mentioned. The comment in the prison scene at the beginning of the episode just felt out of place and sloppy, and then Heather's comment about having saved herself, and not Daredevil saving her, was just an absolute joke. To be honest, though, I do quite like the fact that Heather and Matt are at odds on their stance on vigilantes. I think that's a good idea that they definitely could have done more with. Like, obviously, they do debate the issue, but they only ever tease the fact that Heather may find out who Matt really is, but they never fully go down that route. Or alternatively, have Matt start to see more of her side. They kind of just debate it and never really resolve anything. I'm assuming after the events of the finale, it's something that might get picked up again in season two. But speaking of which, let's just get on to the finale and talk about it now. The start of episode 9 finally reveals to us what happened with Poindexter and his deal with Vanessa. Turns out Vanessa visited him while he was in prison during Fisk's absence to offer him release in exchange for killing Foggy and his client, as the case will reveal information about her business practices that she didn't want making public. She reminds him that he's the best at this type of thing and that he can get his life back on track rather than being in a cell dosed up on drugs that affect his motor abilities and keep him sedated. He signs it, and this is what leads to Foggy being killed. Obviously, he was promised release and freedom by Vanessa, but straight after killing Foggy, he gets thrown off a roof by Matt and ends up back in prison, hence the wanting revenge at the gala. Matt wakes up in his hospital bed after being shot, feels Heather by the side of his bed, but immediately asks if it's Karen, which is quite awkward if you ask me. Kirsten says it's the drugs, and he realises it's Heather after she says that and calls her name instead, but not a very smooth save. Matt tried to explain to Kirsten after this that he knows Vanessa is the one that ordered the hit on Foggy. He just needs to find out why and needs her help to do so. She gives him a clue about a motion to dismiss that he was going to file in that case, and Matt knows that he needs to find this. And Heather doesn't believe any of this and basically leaves him to get some rest, not wanting to speak about it anymore. She's obviously conflicted because she believes in what Fisk is doing and hates vigilantes and doesn't have all the information from Matt. After the shooting, Fisk explains to Vanessa that his project with the Red Hook port, that they can go from moving millions to billions through the ports. He says that he initially wanted to save the city, which is why he ran as mayor, seeming to say that he went in with good intentions, but the opportunities have risen to kind of increase their profits, and with his downward spiral back into Kingpin throughout the series, he's now taking that opportunity. He tells the city officials, including Commissioner Gallo, that he wants to enact martial law on the city and seal it off. His advisor Sheila advises that they can't do that without a large-scale threat to the public safety, something which Fisk is going to orchestrate. Shortly after this, Fisk finds out that Matt is still alive and sends Buck to kill him, as a fallen lawyer who died a hero saving the mayor was much better optics, and that a dead hero was much better than a live vigilante. And not only that, but Fisk also orders Sheila to send everyone in the workforce who isn't fully behind him home. He doesn't want anyone working for him who isn't fully committed, so that he has no threats and can basically get away with whatever he wants. He wants to have complete control over the city, both from a criminal and a legal standpoint. Sheila agrees to do this pretty much without hesitation, although she does look frightened and a little concerned. After the meeting, Commissioner Gallo is waiting for her and wants to get her support for going against Fisk the legal way and getting him out of office. She says that she can't go with him, but she will put in a good word for him against Fisk if needed. They want us to think that she's betrayed Fisk, but we find out shortly after that she's actually recorded this conversation for Fisk and double-crossed Gallo, something she obviously isn't happy about, as once things kick off later in the episode, we actually see her breaking down crying because of what she's done. Buck goes to the hospital to kill Matt via injection, but Matt has heard him coming down the corridor and manages to escape the room before Buck gets to him. The song Killing Me Softly was also playing in the background of this scene, which is quite fitting considering that's exactly what Buck planned to do to Matt. Matt makes it back home to his apartment to find the Punisher there waiting for him. Turns out Karen had called him after hearing that Bullseye had escaped and asked him to look out for Matt, so he was there to help him. The anti-vigilante task force turns up looking for Matt, and a then suited up Matt and the Punisher work their way through them all. Punisher is absolutely brutal in this scene, killing for fun and not holding back in the slightest. Something Matt isn't happy with, as he had told Frank he didn't want this kind of help. They do leave Cole North alive to answer some questions after finding out that his bullet casing was the same one as the cop that killed Hector Ayala. Matt starts to struggle with the idea of killing Cole after finding that out, but as such a big part of his faith and the reason he believes himself to be good is because he doesn't kill. He eventually decides to tell himself that his Cole's life isn't worth losing that and giving into the darkness completely. Frank tries to convince him otherwise and even kills another of the cops that were unconscious at the time, but while him and Matt end up arguing because of what happened, Matt hears a grenade and they both jump out of the window, with Matt grabbing Frank and swinging them both to safety, albeit with quite a painful landing. Karen shows up and picks them up and heads to Frank's shelter. Karen helps patch Matt up following the fight and shoot him, and they have a bit of a catch up where she explains why she called Frank. She does offer the same treatment to Frank, who was looking at Karen a lot during patching himself up, but he refuses her help. He's been quite cold to Karen, just saying that he did her a favour, but it's obvious that he cares more about them and doesn't want them hurt. He's even glad to see Karen, as Matt confirms later on, when he says that he heard both of the heartbeats when they saw each other. Matt tells Karen what he found out about Foggy's case, and Karen offers to be Matt's eyes looking for the evidence stored from the case. Fisk's protege Daniel has gathered some of the politicians in the city to get their support for the Red Hook project to make sure it goes through. And when I say get support, I mean blackmail into giving the support. Daniel really seems to be settling into this role with Fisk and has got a lot more ruthless as the series progresses. I expect him to have an even bigger role in season 2, dealing with a lot more things for Fisk. Fisk has caused a blackout in the city, hiring some of the electrical workers to turn off the grid in order to cause a citywide panic, which will give him reason to enact martial law. There are people looting, and the task force are going around shooting pretty much anyone causing trouble and then covering the tracks by putting masks over faces and calling the victims vigilantes, like they do with a kid who all he'd done is stolen a TV from a shop window. Matt and Karen managed to find the paperwork they were looking for from Foggy's case. Turns out it was a charter stating that Red Hook was actually a free port and therefore exempt from US laws and taxation. If Foggy had released that in the case, it would have brought attention to the Fisk's enterprises and potentially put them out of business, or definitely made it a lot harder and more difficult and risky. So Vanessa had him silenced as well as the client, so no one else would pick this up in the future. While they're there, Matt also reveals to Karen that Frank was happy that he saw her again, but also says that he knows that Karen has feelings for him based on her heartbeat after seeing him, something which Karen actually brings up herself. I'm hoping they lean more into that in season 2, and these two get back together so we can get rid of that god awful Heather. Frank, who'd stolen one of the task force police radios, finds out that the task force are now at Red Hook, so he decides to go down there himself and take them out. He gets there and takes out a large number of the task force before a handful manage to beat him down with both non-lethal bullets and riot shields, until they can manage to tie him up. The remaining members of the task force, after he's tied up, try and convince Frank to join them, saying that they idolise him and would love to serve alongside him, but he calls them crazy for idolising him and that they know nothing about him or what he stands for. He thinks that them and the entire system that they're part of are clowns that have just caused him a lot of pain. They'll never know what he went through or how he feels, and they'll absolutely never join up with them. As this is going on, Commissioner Gallo is set off on his trip to stop Fisk, but sees the driver as someone that he trained, who has now joined the task force, as he notices from the tattoo on his neck. He takes a look up at the sky after realising that this is probably going to be the last time he sees it, before being dropped off at an undisclosed location where Fisk and the task force are waiting for him. Fisk tells the task force that although he's just a cog in a broken machine, Gallo is still to blame for a lot of the issues, and he proceeds to make an example out of him for his betrayal by squeezing his head with his bare hands until it breaks and crushes to pieces. Honestly, this is the most brutal thing I think I've ever seen in any Marvel or any superhero show, period. And I did not expect that from a Disney show at all. It was arguably more brutal than the scene in the original show with Fisk decapitating someone in a car door. And this happens in full view with brilliant special effects. It was both disgusting and fantastic. Matt and Karen turn up at Red Hook Port, but Karen tries to convince Matt not to go in. He's already injured and there's a lot of trained personnel at the site, so she's convinced that he'll either kill people or be killed himself, and that isn't the way to win this. Matt decides that she's right and that he needs to build an army if he's going to beat Fisk, so they walk away, not knowing that Frank's currently being held hostage there to go off and start and build the team. Heather is offered and accepts the position of Commissioner of Mental Health under Fisk's administration. It's unsure whether Heather and Matt are even still together, but I imagine either way, this will result in a big conflict between them next season. Either way, though, at least it will hopefully make her a bit more of an interesting character for a change. Fisk addresses New York, having spun the story so that it was vigilantes that caused the blackout, and is enforcing martial law in order to deal with the vigilantes. He's also put an 8 p.m. curfew in place and now has full control of the city on both a criminal and a legal standpoint. We cut to Matt and Karen at Josie's. God, it's good to have Karen back. Where Matt explains to her that after the accident, he felt that although he lost his eyesight, he feels that in exchange, God gave him a purpose and that this purpose and mask could change his life. But rather, it was him wanting to believe that the mask could save him that actually did. He thought that he was immune to the darkness, which allowed it to get inside him. He confesses he wanted to kill Bullseye, that he doesn't really know who he is anymore. Karen rightly assures Matt that Foggy knew all of him and still believed in him, and he needs to do the same with himself. They get up and walk into the bar at Josie's, and he starts to talk to some of the good cops of the city, including Detective Kim and Cherry, about how they need to help the city, going against the failing and corrupt system and resist what Fisk has been trying to turn the city into. As he's giving the speech, we see that Fisk has locked up most of his adversaries, including some of the billionaires, Frank Castle and the swordsman. But in a post-credit scene, we do see that Frank Castle has tricked one of the guards into escaping and is ready for his special presentation, which is on the way. And that was Daredevil Born Again. Obviously, they've left a lot open ended to the point that this finale felt like more of a mid season finale. They didn't have a big final battle. Karen has only just returned. Swordsman and a lot of the other elites are still locked up. Fisk is running the city and has just enforced martial law. It just doesn't feel like a season finale at all. However, it is nice and a bit of a change of pace for the villain to be the victor at the end of a Marvel show. The only time they've really done that is Infinity War, so it does make a nice change, even if it basically is just a mid season finale. Overall, I have seriously mixed feelings about this series. On the one hand, I thought it was better than pretty much all of the other series that Marvel have produced since they started doing the Disney Plus shows, but on the other hand, it's not a shadow of the original. They would have done better making it a proper continuation with the same cast, which it looks like season 2 might be getting slightly closer towards, with Karen being a more regular cast member, and I'm sure I've seen set photos of Jessica Jones appearing as well. The characters that they did bring in were very two dimensional and were primarily just there to serve a purpose without really being fleshed out at all. I mean, I couldn't really tell you anything about Cherry other than the fact that he's a retired cop who knows Matt's identity, and Heather's the therapist with bad luck who hates vigilantes. Other than that, what do we actually know about them as people? Nothing. They're either there to tell the audience information or to tell Matt information, or for the majority of their screen time, and it just makes it even more obvious how much I miss Karen and Foggy in the show. I also don't understand how, in a 9 episode season, considering there used to be 13, that they can justify having an episode halfway through that can be completely stripped from the show without making a fucking difference. I mean, sure, the bank robbery is another thing to add to the list of why Matt has returned to being Daredevil, but I'm pretty sure he would have made the same decision based on all of the other catalysts in the series without this one being there as well. It really didn't need to be there, and it just felt out of place. Like they were trying to fill time and just somehow make use of the fact that they were in the MCU by having Miss Marvel's dad appear. I'm also not very happy with how they dealt with the whole Vanessa storyline this season. Obviously, her character was only added in reshoots, so they had limited time to figure out how to make it work in the show, but I feel like they really missed the mark with the way they did it. Based on the Netflix show that this is a continuation of, it's absurd to think that if Fisk went missing for about a year or so, that she would cheat on him. They'd been separated in the past with minimal contact, and they'd stayed faithful and done everything they could to get back to each other. And with how much they loved each other and how much she was getting involved in his world, there is no chance that she would have changed that much as to cheat on him after a year of him being injured and going missing. She would have stopped at anything to find him, so I'm not having that at all. I am kind of surprised that they didn't go down the route of Foggy having faked his death after the Easter eggs during his death in episode 1, but you never know, they might pick this up again in season 2. I really hope this theory is correct and he isn't really dead, because Foggy's one of the best things about the original show, and this show really misses his presence. I also feel like they introduced some really cool characters in White Tiger and Muse, but unfortunately both of them have been killed off, so we won't see either of them again. Especially with Muse, I feel like they could have done a lot more with his character. If you lean into the comic book powers that he had, where Daredevil can't sense him, he really could have had potential to be a season-long villain for a potential future season, but oh well. But on the plus side, the action set pieces were brilliant, and especially in the back half of the show, the special effects were great. And with Fisk crushing Gallows' head, definitely is the standout as far as effects go. There was at least moments that captured the feel of the original show, mainly the first 10 minutes before Foggy's killed, and parts of the finale and the few scenes where Matt and Fisk are talking to one another. If they lean more into these elements in the second season, we might be onto a winner. For me, it wasn't as good as the Netflix show, but there was potential which can be built upon in season 2, and I'm interested to see how this Fisk storyline will wrap up and whether it will feature in projects such as Spider-Man 4 or anything else in the MCU. I do feel as though the show was handled better than most of the Disney Plus shows and was definitely more engaging. I just hope that it further improves in season 2 and gets close to the original show that we love so much. And that is my review for Daredevil Born Again. But obviously, those are just my opinions, and it'd be great to hear what you guys think about the show. So feel free to let me know if you disagree about anything I've said, or if you agree and hope season 2 is a big improvement on this one in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on future uploads. That's all from me. Have a good one, everyone, and I'll catch you next time.